Hi everyone! I hope that you're doing well. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome for the first time. I'm Amy, and we are talking about the books that I read in the month of July. But first off, let me know how you are in the comments. Let me know how this month of July has been. I can't believe we are already at the end of this month. This year has been flying by, but this has been a pretty solid reading month for me. I read 9 books, and I actually just finished one today as I am filming this. But it was a really good reading month. I didn't have any 5 stars, but I had a lot of 4 stars and just some solid books. I've got sci-fi, I've got fantasy, I've got some more pirate books for you, and even some mythology in there as well. So let's just get into this list. My first read of the month was continuing the Murderbot Diary series by Martha Wells. I read Rogue Protocol, the 3rd book of the Murderbot Diaries, and this is just a fun sci-fi novella series. I gave this one 3 stars. I wasn't as into the plot of this one as I was the first 2, but it was still a lot of fun. It had all the action and it had the funny social awkwardness of Murderbot that everybody loves about the series. And it's just a good time. And I definitely want to continue with the series. I've been listening to the audiobooks, and I think maybe I need to switch to the physical. I just have a better time kind of concentrating, especially with sci-fi books. That's just not my kind of bread and butter genre, but I still am enjoying it. And for anyone that is wanting to get into sci-fi, or if you like humor in your sci-fi, I would definitely recommend these books. My next read was The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan. This is the first of his Heroes of Olympus series, and this was a 4-star for me. This is a fun, kind of action-packed middle grade fantasy with Roman and Greek mythology. And we are just continuing in the world of demigods, of Percy Jackson. So if you love Percy Jackson, this is just continuing with the story. This is the next series after Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And we have new leading characters. So let's get into the premise of the story. So we are following the story of 3 different characters, and we're starting with a male main character, Jason, who wakes up on a boarding school bus where he doesn't remember who he is or why he's there, doesn't know anything going on. But our female main character, Piper, and our other main male character, Leo, say that they know him and that they're friends. So it's kind of a weird situation, and it gets even weirder when they are attacked by these creatures and they have to go to Camp Half-Blood. And if you are familiar with the Percy Jackson series, you know that is where all the demigods go. And so they're going there for protection, and they are thrown into this crazy adventure. This was just a super fun fantasy series, getting to continue in the world of the demigods and Rick Riordan's creation. And it was just a lot of fun getting to read this with my husband. He's a big fan of Rick Riordan, and I read the Percy Jackson series last year, and so we wanted to continue with his different series. And it was just super fun. And it's definitely middle grade. There is more like kind of younger humor in there, but I still really enjoyed it. And I would definitely recommend reading Percy Jackson and the Olympians first in order to have like a fuller understanding. But yeah, we're dealing with totally different characters, and I highly recommend. My next read, I read a cozy fantasy that is Cursed Cocktails by S.L. Rowland. I gave this 4 stars. This is a adult cozy fantasy very similar to Legends and Lattes, except with a tavern and cocktails. And again, I thoroughly enjoyed this. It is sweet, it is cozy, there are lovely characters, and there's even a queer romance in there, and I definitely want to continue in this world. So the premise of this story is we are following a character named Roran, who is an elf and a blood mage, but he is having to retire from the military because he is injured, and he goes to this town called Eastbourne to settle, and he makes some kind of unlikely friends and then decides to open a tavern with some really interesting cocktail recipes. Overall, I would highly recommend this cozy fantasy, especially for cozy fantasy lovers, and if you enjoyed Legends and Lattes. My next book was kind of a letdown for me. That is The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer. She is also the author of The Wishing Game, and I received an ARC for this book, and it came out July 16th. But I gave this 2.5 stars. I just really didn't care for this book. But this is an adult fantasy that is supposed to have kind of fairy tale vibes and was said to be inspired by the Chronicles of Narnia. Unfortunately, there were just many aspects of this book that I did not like. I found that there was just kind of odd pacing. I found the ending only like kind of somewhat satisfying. I thought there were just some weird writing style choices, and I thought it was just kind of a weak fantasy world. I just wanted there to be more, and I thought the execution was kind of poor. And I really hate hating on a book, but I want to give like more specific reasons why I didn't like these things. With the odd pacing, it was just weird that we didn't get to the fantasy world until like over halfway through the book. And so once we were in the fantasy world, I felt the time in there was rushed, and therefore it was affecting like the world building of the fantasy world. There just wasn't enough there to really have like a solid foundation for this fantasy world, and it just felt kind of weak to me. With the ending, I just found that even though there were some like kind of redemptive moments in the ending, I just found it just kind of like dragged on with details that I didn't really care about. And so I was just wanting it to end, even though I was wanting more time in the fantasy world. It was just kind of all over the place. And with the weird writing style choices, the writer was trying to like juxtapose like the real world and the fantasy world, and I just felt like it wasn't done in a very good way. It was kind of like there were just like weird like kind of trite jokes and kind of weak dialogue, especially in the setting of the real world, that I felt like just kind of cheapened the writing. And I feel like that's really harsh, but it was just, I just really did not get into the dialogue. And I'm a big dialogue person. Now, I didn't hate everything in this book. I did enjoy the characters, I enjoyed the romance, I enjoyed the premise of having this kind of magic portal in the middle of like the mountains in West Virginia. And I enjoyed the magic when it was there. And even though there were good aspects to it, I just felt like the negatives that I have explained just kind of outweighed the positives. So I gave it a 2.5. In the month of July, I got into some pirate books, and my next read was one of these pirate books, and that is Song of the Current by Sarah Tulser. This is a YA pirate fantasy with politics and some high stakes, and this was a 4-star read for me. I really enjoyed this book. Our story follows a female main character, Caro or Caroline Orestilla, and she and her father sail a riverboat called a wherry, and they are smugglers or transporters, and they believe in this god of the river and in this world where it's like interconnected rivers where they live. And Caro is waiting for the day when the god speaks to her like it speaks to everybody else. But one day Caro's father is asked by the government to transport a mysterious crate, and when he refuses, he is arrested. And so, in order to free him, Caro has to transport this mysterious crate, and in that, a whole crazy political, high stakes river and high seas adventure is unlocked. And I just really enjoyed this book. It had some really interesting politics going on. It had some romance in there. It had some really interesting magic. We're kind of dealing with a little bit of mythology in there and magical creatures. We're dealing with kind of different variations of pirates. There's kind of like the evil people that are labeled as pirates, but then there's also the people of Caro's family who are smugglers, but they're still seen as like good people and everything. So it's a very like varied society. And it's just really interesting the relationships that she has with different people and just how the adventure plays out. And I definitely want to get to the next book. I think the only drawback that I could see from this book is that it is YA, but there is a little bit of spice in there. There's definitely some like spicier like kissing scenes, and then there's kind of like a closed door scene in there as well. So just be aware of that as far as content. And there is some violence in there as well. So when it comes to like YA or middle grade, I try to like be upfront about those things. So those are the only like drawbacks I would think, but I still really, really enjoyed this story. My next book is one by the author TJ Klune, and I've kind of had a weird journey with TJ Klune's writing. I really, really enjoyed House in the Cerulean Sea, and so I wanted to try more of his works. But I read Wolf Song and I didn't really enjoy that. And my next book, In the Lives of Puppets, I it was okay. I didn't necessarily love it. So I'm just kind of wanting to get more of what was in The House in the Cerulean Sea. And there is a sequel coming up. So I'm hoping that I will be able to get more of that. But In the Lives of Puppets is a sci fi fantasy retelling of the Pinocchio story with a bit of a queer romance in there. I gave this 3 stars. Again, I didn't necessarily love this. It just kind of dragged in some places, and there's at least like one scene, if not more, that kind of made me uncomfortable. The only way I can think to describe it without giving too much away is a robot um, pleasure house. Do with that what you will. So we are following the story of a human boy named Victor who was raised by an android named Giovanni in this kind of dystopian world where robots are the predominant race. And one day, Giovanni is kidnapped and his true past is revealed, and Victor and the robots that he restored from the scrapyard have to go on this kind of crazy adventure in order to save Giovanni. Again, I didn't necessarily love this book. There were definitely things that I enjoyed about it. I really enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the kind of romance that was in there. And it was really interesting kind of to see the Pinocchio story told in a different way. So if you like retellings with kind of a sci-fi fantasy spin on it, I would recommend this. I just don't really know if it was for me, and it definitely wasn't my favorite of TJ Klune's work. My next read was The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. I thoroughly enjoyed this book, this sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart. If you're not familiar with it, it is a YA kind of fantasy romance with fairy tale vibes, and we are following the story of a girl named Evangeline who lost her true one love, and she goes to a fate, the Prince of Hearts or Jax, in order to make a bargain with him to get her love back. And in return, Jax asks for 3 kisses, which have kind of a magical spin to them. And the story is just kind of this fast paced adventure. And there's definitely a lot of romantic tension and a lot of kind of twists and turns. I love the lore of this world, and definitely the second book you're kind of getting more into like the history of the world, and it's very interesting. I don't want to give too much of the plot away since this is a sequel, but I thoroughly enjoy this series. It is so much fun. I don't know if I said I gave this 4 stars. Um, just something to be aware of. There definitely is some like spicier like kissing in this book. So just be aware of that. I try to be upfront about those things, especially with like YA books, but I definitely wanted to get into the next book because it left on such a cliffhanger, this sequel. I had to get into the third book. I already started the audiobook. I read the physical for the first 2 books. I wanted to give the audiobook a try, and it's definitely been interesting. It's being done pretty well so far, so I'm curious to see how it will end. But again, I highly recommend this. It is just fun, fast-paced fantasy romance, and highly recommend. My last read for the month of July was Daughter of the Siren Queen by Trisha Levenseller. This is the sequel to Daughter of the Pirate King, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoy this series. It's a YA pirate fantasy series, and even though it is YA, it doesn't necessarily feel YA because I feel like it has the high stakes and kind of the emotional maturity of an adult book, but it still has like the ease of reading of a YA fantasy. I really enjoy the magic of this world. I really enjoy the romance of the story, and I just enjoy the kind of high stakes of this story. There's definitely adventure, they are cutthroat pirates, and there is surprisingly a lot of like psychological depth to these stories. But with that comes some trigger warnings. We're kind of dealing with different types of abuse. Our main character deals with kind of emotional abuse and physical abuse, but you really get to kind of see her thoughts and her kind of emotionally like healing with that. There's also discussion of SA in there as well. It's minor, but it's still in there, so just trigger warnings with that. But I just thoroughly enjoy this series. I listened to the audiobook for this. I read the physical for the first book, but I really enjoyed the audiobook. It was still easy to follow and listen to. I think that's what I really loved about this. It was like it had like a lot of meat to it, and it was fast paced. It was easy to get through, but I still felt like I was getting like a satisfying pirate story. So if you love pirates and you like YA fantasy, but it's still, I feel like would appeal to adults as well. Obviously, I'm an adult, but I just really enjoyed this pirate fantasy. So guys, that was everything that I read in the month of July. I hope you enjoyed this list and maybe got some suggestions for your TBR. But definitely let me know in the comments what you read in the month of July and if you've read any of the books that I have mentioned today. So let's chat in the comments and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!